Today we will build a patch from scratch, concentrating on one variation of a specific technique called Hocketing, which means basically that you split one sequence between different voices, creating a bit more texture and variation, but still using the same original sequence. So first of all, I have here the clock module clocked from Impromptu that we will use as the clock. I have also the mix master, of course, from MindMeld, and a send reverb. Feel free, of course, to use any other clock or mixer. I will just mention that all of the modules I will be using today are available for free, so all of you can follow along. Another thing I have here is the cable color key from Inclan. This one here, I will also use color coding, so maybe it will be easier to follow along. So let's start with the patch. Let's start with the sequencer, and I will use Bordel from Bido. It's quite a deep sequencer that has a few interesting features, but it's still pretty intuitive to use. It has an internal clock, but we will still clock it from our clock module. Let's put it here, right? So I'm going to use one clock. Clocks will be blue. This will go to the external clock input. Let's go with the BPM of, let's say, about 105, all right. And already I will use a multiplied by 2 clock. So clock resolution of 2 ppqn. And let's add our first voice, and we will build something basic quickly. So we will need the VCO from VCV, a VCA, and an envelope, an ADSR module in this case. Right, I will use a triangle wave, audio will be red, and we will use also the envelope to control the VCA, modulation will be green. Right, and already we can send the VCA to the mixer. And now let's connect the sequencer. So we have a few outputs here. We have the gate output, this will go to the envelope. And we have the pitch output, pitch will be yellow, that will go to the volt per octave input of the VCO. Right, now we can set a scale on the sequencer. So let's go with E, let's say the key will be E, and we will go with minor. Now here minor is Aeolian. Right, so now we have E minor. Right, and now let's randomize the pitch. In the right-click menu we can randomize the pitch. Right, and as you can hear, the range is way too high, but we can change this. There is a knob here, it's called pitch sensitivity, and I can take it down. Right, and this will change the range. Right, now let's go with 12 steps. Here in the steps we can change this to 12, and you can see we have only 8 steps here, but what will happen, it will play 8 steps, and then it will play 4 more, right? And like this we will have 12 steps. Now before we change the sequence a bit more, let's add movement to this voice. So we will use the LLFO from Bog Audio. This is just a small LFO module, right? And also the sample and hold from Bog Audio. We will clock the sample and hold with the sequencer. I can just hold Control and grab another cable. This will go to the upper input of the gate, input here on the sample and hold, and internally it will be connected, it will be normalized to the lower input, so there is no need to connect both. Right, now this sample and hold will control the envelope, so let's take the sustain down. One, again modulation is green, one output will control the attack, let's say, and another one the decay. Just to add a bit movement. And the LFO we will use to add some vibrato to this noise via the FM input, right? So let's connect this to the FM, and let's for a second just exaggerate a bit. Right, something like this. And now if I hold Control and Shift, I can make really fine movements. Right? So something like this is nice. Alright, now let's add some reverb. Oh yes. Again, I have here send reverb with plateau, of course. Okay, now by the way, if you are not familiar with sample and hold or LFOs, sequencers, modulation and so on, I have a series of videos all about the basics of synthesis in the modular environment or the basics of modular synthesis in VCV2, where I go through all of the basic concepts of synthesis. So there is a link in the description if you are interested. Okay, so now let's improve this sequence a bit by first of all changing the number of pulses. So here we have pulses per step. We can have, for example, step number 3 have 2 pulses, right? And another step to have, let's say, 3. Right, we can also introduce some random pitch variation. Here with the line here of small knobs, we can add variation to the pitch. So let's say randomize these two a bit, and it will all stay in scale because we have the scale selected. Right, now we can add also some space to this sequence by adding probability to the steps with this line of small knobs here. Right, we can reduce the probability that a step will actually happen. So let's do something like this maybe. Right, just to add some space. Okay, now let's name this channel here VCO, just so we know what's going on. And let's add another voice. In this case, we will use Trummor 2. Trummor 2 from Volt is a drum synthesizer, but it can also work really nicely for melodic voices. Let me just mute this for a second. All you have to do is tune it, right, with the tune knob. And I like also to take the bend down so there is no pitch modulation. I have a preset ready for this, so we don't have to go through the tuning process, and there is a link in the description to where you can download this preset together with the patch we will build. So in the right-click menu, I will go to presets, and I have here melodic, and now it's ready to be used as a melodic voice. Okay, now let's connect the sequencer also to Trummor 2. So again, I will hold Control and I can take just another cable. This will be the pitch, and you can see here in the modulation router, you see everything is set to tune, so it's already set to control the pitch. I just have to open the attenuator all the way, and we will use also the gates. Right, let's connect this to the mixer. Right, maybe we can, you know what, randomize the notes a bit so we get something else. Alright, this is better. I hope you are with headphones or with good speakers, because otherwise you will not be able to hear this voice. It's quite low. Okay, so now with Trummor 2 we have a few ways to change the timbre and sound, right? We can change the decay, right? We can add some shaping to the voice. I can also add the noise section. Right, and then again change the decay, add a high pass filter, and also a comb filter, which is basically a sort of a delay. Right, so this we can also do, and we will add more modulation to make these changes. So I will use another sample and hold module. Right, again, I will clock this with the sequencer, and now in the right-click menu I can change the range of this sample and hold. By default it will be 0 to 10. I will change this to positive negative 5 volts, so it will be a bipolar modulation, which means that if, for example, we modulate the decay, so the decay will move in both directions, right? Bipolar modulation. So let's really modulate the decay of both sections of the oscillator part and the noise part. Right, so first of all I will need 2 cables, 1 and 2. And now if I click one of the buttons, you see it says move a control to assign it. So if I move the decay, Now the decay will be assigned as a modulation destination, and now I can open the attenuator. Right, I will do the same with the decay of the noise. Right, for now the noise is all the way down, but now what we will do, we will use the velocity function of the sequencer to control the level of the noise section, right? So here on the sequencer, let me just assign this already, right? And open the attenuator all the way. So here on the sequencer, we have another output, the accent output, that we can also use for velocity, right? So this will go to this last input on the modulation router. And now we can use, right, we can set up velocity with this here and also add randomness. So let's do something like this maybe. Right, and then add some randomness to everything. Right? So now we have both voices playing basically the same sequence. Right, but now let's introduce the Hocketing technique. For this we will need two sequential switches. I will just mute this for a second. So we will need two sequential switches, the 1 to 4. I will use the 1 to 4 from VCV, 1 and 2. Right, with these switches we can switch between different destinations, which in our case would be the different voices. And we have one switch for pitch, right? So let's connect this. I will use the pitch information with this switch, send it to the input of the switch. And the other switch will be for the gates from the sequencer, right? So we have one for pitch and one for gates. And now if I connect the first outputs to the VCO voice, we will have the same results, right? So first of all, let me disconnect the voices from the main sequencer. And now I will connect the VCO once the pitch and once the gates. And we will listen to this. Right, we basically get the same results because now the sequencer will come out from the first output. Let's mute this for a second again. But again, thanks to the switches, we can split this sequence and send it to the second voice as well. All we need is a trigger to trigger the switches so they will advance to the next step. So first of all, since we have only two voices for now, let's set the switches to 2 steps. Right, so they will have for now just 2 steps. And let's use a clock division, let's say of 3. So I will stop the clock. Right, set a division 1, 2, and 3. Right, this will go to the clock input of the sequential switches. Already I can unmute this. Right, let's use also the reset for everything, just that everything is running together. Right, and now we can run the clock and send the voice, the second output to the second voice, to Trummor 2, right, pitch and gates. Right? So now we have the same sequence but split into 2 voices. I will just quickly name this Trummor. Okay, now let's add another voice. This time we will use energy from the geodesics. And just for a second, let's connect it to the mixer so we can work on the sound. I will also solo it. Now energy has 2 oscillators. One will modulate the amplitude of the other. And we can have the modulating oscillator set to LFO rates to get tremolo. So let's do this. Here with this button here, we can change the mode, the quantization mode, and you can see the color here is changing. When it's yellow, it will be an LFO, and you can hear the amplitude modulation. You can change the rate. Right, and we can also change the shape by introducing FM. Basically, the oscillator will modulate its own frequency, so sort of feedback modulation. With this control here, this will control this oscillator. right? So we get a different modulation shape. Right, and we can add also FM to the first oscillator, again, sort of feedback modulation, and change the timbre. So let's use modulation for this. I will use another LFO, another LLFO. This will go to the CV input, right, and it will be something like this. Let's add some reverb and change the name here to energy. Oh yes, indeed. Reverb is life. Okay, now energy has also a built-in sort of VCA, right, through the multiply input here. So let's use another envelope. I will send it to the multiply input, and we will use the third steps of the switch. So one, again, will go to the volt per octave input. The other one will go to the gates, to the ADSR, sorry. Right? And now let's unmute everything and set this to have 3 steps. And we have also to reset everything. No, once again. No. Now here I set it to 2 steps, you see? Okay, now. Right, let's again change the envelope a bit. So we have 3 voices with the same sequence. Now, before we move on, let's use something else to drive the switches other than the clock division, right? We can use, for example, another sequencer. And in this case, we will use algorithm from Grayscale, which is a gate or a trigger sequencer, if you will. Again, we will clock it with the same clock, and I will also use the reset, right, just to make sure that everything works together. Let's start the sequencer, and let's turn on, let's say, steps 1, 5, and 7, right, and use this to clock the switches. Again, we have to reset everything. Right? So now we have a look at the switches, they move much more rapidly. And now let's make this even more interesting. Right here we have 12 steps on board L. Here we have 3 steps, but a length of 8. So let's change the length now to 7 to add even more variation. In the right-click menu, we can go to sequence length. Right, and now I just choose 7. So now it will be 7 steps. Let's go back to grid programming. Right, so now we have here 12, here 7, but only 3 triggers. Right, and this will switch between the voices. Let's add also some delay to the energy voice with Tap Dancer from Flag, a really nice delay module. I really like it. It's great for sound design. Right, so we'll send energy to it. And now we have a few options here. We can add some drive. We can add some modulation for the delay time. Right, we can also add ducking, so the original sound, the dry sound, will lower the amplitude of the delay, and the delay signal, the delay itself, right, and add more space. Right, so add some ducking also for the feedback. Right, there is a built-in filter. It's a really interesting delay module. Okay, now let's add another voice that will be a bit more glitchy, hopefully. So in this case, we will use Opulus from Volt. Right, this is an FM voice. And again, let's concentrate on the sound first. So I will use the original sequence, right? Gates and volt per octave. This will go to the mixer and I will solo it. Right, so now it plays the full sequence. I just want to work on the sound first. So let's create a nice FM plucky sound. So basically, oscillator 1 will modulate the frequency of oscillator 2. Right, so if I raise the level, right, we get FM. I can also change the ratio, so the octaves, or actually the ratio, it's less of octaves. I can multiply the frequency. Right, and let's change the envelope. So first of all, we will change this with the buttons here to exponential, so it's more plucky. Take the decay down and release. And the decay and the release of the modulator, the modulating oscillator, will be even quicker. Right, so we get this woody sound. Yeah, we can add also some space, just for fun. You can add also modulation here to different things if you want, but now what I will do, I will add chronoblob 2 and plateau. Right, chronoblob 2 is a delay and plateau is a beautiful reverb, of course. Right, so I will just connect them. I will take for a second chronoblob 2 the wet all the way down. On plateau it's already down, so I will just connect everything. So now we get basically the same. Right, and this will be the sort of a glitch setup that we will use. So first of all, what we need is chances from count modular. This module here, this will add probability. It will take a gate or a clock or a trigger and it will add probability to it. Right, so let's use the gates from the sequencer. Again, I just hold control and I can take another cable. This will go to the input and I will set chances to latch mode. So there is no chance two gates will come one after the other, just so we have more space between the glitches. And now output A will, output A will freeze the delay. There is a loop function here on chronoblob 2 that will freeze the delay. And when the delay will be frozen, we take another copy of this cable. It will also bring in the wet amount. No need for feedback. Change delay time. Voila. Right? So at the same time it's looping the delay, it will bring in also the wet amount. Now all we need is to modulate the delay times. So again, I will use sample and hold. I will use the gates from the chances module. Again, gates are blue. Again, in the right click menu, I will change this to negative positive 5 volts. So the modulation will go in both directions. One output will go to the left channel, another output to the right. And now here we have also the time modulation mode. Now it's crossfading, so there are no glitches in pitch. There is no pitch shifting. If I change this to tape or resampling, right? There are also glitches in the pitch, which is also something I like. And now let's involve also plateau in this, right? So we will use another chances. Again, I will use the sequencer, right? And output A in this case will clear the buffer of the reverb. It will just remove everything from the buffer so the reverb can start new. This adds also a sort of a glitchy sound. Right, let's add wet amount. Right? And now plateau has also, we can also turn off the diffusion and turn it more into a sort of a granular delay, if you will. Right, so if I turn off diffusion and take this diffusion knob all the way left, maybe raise the size a bit. Right, you hear it? Right, so it's nice and glitchy. And again, now instead of using the main sequencer to run this voice, we can use the output from the switches. So again, one will go to the volt per octave, one will go to the gate. We have to switch this to have 4 steps. Unmute everything. And now we have one sequence, one original sequence being split into 4 voices. Lots of variation, lots of texture. Right, and of course you can experiment with all sorts of different things. Right, and this will work also in hardware, so all you will need is a sequential switch. For example, you can experiment with Max Slicer if you have it in hardware. Also in VCV you can experiment with it, it's available for free. Right, you can use the switch to switch between the pitch information and then use the gates to gate your voices. Or you can use Tine or Tane from Instruo. In hardware you can use both parts as a 1 to 2. Right, so you can use this to switch between 2 different voices. One will be pitch, one will be gates. Right, so you can use this module to switch between 2 different voices. Or you can use the IntelliGel Shifty, which is not available in VCV, but basically Shifty is more or less meant for this Hocketing technique. You see there are 4 outputs, 4 for gates, 4 for CV that you can use for pitch, so you can split up to 4 voices, right? One sequence to 4 voices, gates and CV in one module, which is quite helpful. Right, but anyway, this is the patch. You can add all sorts of things like drums, percussion, chords, solo lines, and so on. If you do end up using this patch, adding to it or modifying it, feel free to tag me. I would love to have a listen. I hope you enjoyed this video. Cheers!